Hey everybody, I am back with Jordan Reasoner, who is the man to talk to about leaky gut. We had a fair amount of conversation about it in the movie, and we've gotten a lot of questions from people saying, hey, how do you know if you have leaky gut? So in designing the summit, immediately, you know, one of the first things that bubbled up was we need to talk to Jordan about this. So Jordan, welcome to the summit.
Thanks for having me, man. It's always fun to be here. We became friends over last year. Just saw you in Palm Springs, so it's good to have a little chat about some leaky gut today. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's you know, here's the thing. Some people get into this business because they went in to become a doctor and wanted to help people from the very start. You came in a very different way, but probably the trial by fire way, if you will. So give us a little bit of background so that people can understand where you're coming from.
Oh man, yeah. My story really culminated about 7 years ago. It was 2 a.m. If you can picture me at my kitchen table, I was having diarrhea 10 to 15 times a day at that time in my life. I had chronic fatigue. It was just tough to get out of bed to go to work every day. And I was 22 years old. So at that time in my life, I had a 1-year-old son and a wife, and I didn't have a will. I mean, I was 22 years old. You know, what 22-year-old kid has a will these days? And I honestly sat up that night and I hand wrote my will on a piece of notebook paper because I didn't think that the way my body was falling apart around me that I'd be living that much longer. And so, man, I sat up and I just hand wrote my will for my wife, and I gave it to her the next morning. And she looked at me like, no, you need to take care of your son. You need to stay alive here. Let's figure this out. And from that point forward, just really dove full into this health thing. And changed my diet, changed my lifestyle, changed my supplements, and I started to begin to finally overcome the celiac disease that was literally killing me at that time in my life.
Wow. And you are now, I mean, you guys have helped, I don't know, tens of thousands of people with what you've been teaching. We talked about it a little bit in the movie, obviously, and saying, the foods that are messing us up are causing this thing called leaky gut. We didn't get too far into it. So can you explain what leaky gut syndrome is so that we can start from there?
Oh, yeah. And it's, it sounds really complicated. It sounds really weird, right? Like leaky gut. It doesn't sound like a fun thing to have, but it's actually called intestinal permeability, as you know, and most of the listeners probably know. But what's fascinating to me is, at this point in time, there's almost 11,000 papers in the scientific literature about intestinal permeability. So it's growing in popularity. We're starting to understand it more. But if we're really going to look at it about what it is in plain English, the bottom line is this. Our gut is a hollow tube, mouth to anus. And so, in general, we have a 1-cell thick wall that lines our intestines. If you can imagine, they have little fingers like this. They're called villi, right? And they have enterocyte cells on them. So this 1-cell thick wall is beginning to, when it becomes leaky, it begins to allow toxic food particles, environmental chemicals, and bacterial waste to leak through your digestive tract and into your body, where it's not supposed to be. And once inside, they're literally foreign particles at that point. They travel to different areas of your body, and they jumpstart an immune response, which begins a lot of what you talked about in the movie is the inflammation cascade. And that inflammation cascade is really, by definition, the underlying root cause of a lot of chronic disease in the world. And it begins that jump-started the development of the process of chronic disease. So bottom line, plain English, instead of keeping the bad stuff out, the delicate lining of the intestine is letting all these bad environmental toxins, food particles, and bacterial waste to leak inside of our body and start that inflammation cascade.
So this sounds really freaky and just so gnarly, if you will, right? This sounds like sci-fi where things are permeating your leaky gut and getting into your body and creating an autoimmune response. I think I need people to understand just how common this is. Where are we at with these numbers?
It's such a tough number to pin, man. I mean, a lot of times it's called the disease that your doctor can't diagnose. And I love that nickname, and because it literally can masquerade as fatigue, anxiety, depression, digestive symptoms, weight problems. And then if you look at, what can it manifest in terms of disease, if you want to try a fun experiment and you have a chronic illness, go ahead and go to Google and type your chronic illness. Let's say it's chronic fatigue. Let's say it's heart disease or, asthma or diabetes. You type that in and then the plus symbol and then intestinal permeability into Google, and you will find a published research paper looking at a correlation between that condition or disease or diagnosis and intestinal permeability. I mean, there's 11,000 papers on this thing, and it's frightening. So it's been found in association with all kinds of chronic disease. I mean, we're talking asthma, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, kidney disease, psoriasis, chronic fatigue, even heart failure. And so we're not even talking about autoimmune diseases really yet. And when you throw autoimmune disease in there, I mean, it's literally a hidden epidemic. We could be talking about hundreds of millions of people in the United States right now alone who have conditions that are associated with leaky gut, that have conditions that the inflammation and immune cascade that begins that disease, the first step is leaky gut. So in terms of asking how common it is, I mean, man, it's ubiquitous at this point. I think it's one of the most chronic epidemics in our society these days.
Okay, so let's go back quickly and figure out why it is that this is now happening. I mean, we allude to it in the movie, but it's it's like this wasn't humanity's fate from the get-go, right? So how the hell did we end up in this mess?
Well, I remember back when I was sick, I felt like everything was so unrelated. And I love that you talked about this in the movie because I had a digestive disease, and I was going to an autoimmune specialist, but I was also going to a gastroenterologist for my stomach pain and diarrhea. I was going to a chronic fatigue guy. I was going to my general practitioner. I had about 7 different doctors, right? And then I also had acne, so I was going to the dermatologist. I had depression, so I was having therapy and all these other things. So I had, all these different doctors on my team, and none of them knew what was wrong with me. And all I had was laundry list of prescription drugs at my disposal at that point. And at that point in time, it just seemed all unrelated. And I never put it together in my head that it was related. But what I loved about the movie is you really shine a light on how the gut can be the core of a lot of these underlying conditions. And even 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates, who was considered the father of modern medicine, and practitioners take the Hippocratic oath now to become a practitioner, he was, at the end of his life, quoted as writing, all disease begins in the gut. And it's also said the gut is the mother of the body because how it feeds everything from our brain to our skin, just like mama feeds baby. And it's also called the second brain, and how similar the two are. And the stats that get thrown around, about 90 to 95% of our serotonin in the body is actually in the gut, not in our brain. And it's also called the body's first line of defense because 70 to 80% of the body's immune cells are in the gut. So you get the idea. I mean, it's often overlooked, but the gut really is one of the most common things that ties our body together in one place. And I love that in Chris Kresser's book, he coined it the gut disease connection. And I think that's really powerful because, you can look at all the research out there, and I've got some here for our talk today. I mean, when you talk about looking at different areas where the gut impacts the body, you talk about the gut metabolism connection, for example. The gut plays a huge role in your weight and how well your metabolism is burning and storing fat. I've got one paper here that says changes in gut microbiota are associated with increased appetite and increased rate at which we store calories as fat. So right there you have a direct connection in the research. The gut-skin connection. There's a clear connection in the research between gut problems and the skin. One paper here found that 14% of patients with ulcerative colitis and 24% of patients with Crohn's have skin rashes. The gut-immune connection. We talked a lot about the development of leaky gut and how the immune system gets activated and it's going after these foreign invaders, but we have Dr. Alessio Fasano's groundbreaking research. For people who want to geek out a little bit, Dr. Fasano's got this new leaky gut theory of autoimmunity, which says that we can't have autoimmune disease without leaky gut being the first step in the development of the disease, which really is groundbreaking at this point. And then, then we talk about the gut-brain connection, right? We've all heard about people who have obvious GI problems when they get nervous, right? Like we've got high-performance athletes that will throw up before a big game, right? Or we've got people who will have diarrhea before they public speak and things like that. So we get that connection, but it works the other way too. And I've got a paper here, inflammation in the gut can alter mood and cause depression. That was published. And another one showing that increased intestinal permeability is commonly associated with children on the ASD spectrum. So we understand the connection there. And then our good friend Dr. Sarah Gottfried, I mean, she's always talking about hormones and the gut hormone connection, and we know that many hormones in the body play a critical role in the gut. And stress has been shown to increase leaky gut and intestinal permeability, and then alter our GI motility in the research. So we've just talked about kind of 5 quick areas where the gut is connected to all of the other areas of our body. And I think that we've just kind of overlooked that in modern medicine, and that's why I loved that you brought it up so much in the Origins movie and how critical it was in telling that story.
Well, first of all, thank you. And so, yeah, I mean, it's nuts, right? I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. And when you start looking at all of these things coming together, and more importantly, I mean, just when you start fixing people's guts, all of a sudden 12, 15 different symptoms or syndromes start clearing up all at once, some faster than others. But I mean, this is for anyone who's listening to this and has any of those symptoms and potential diagnoses that Jordan's talking about here. Your ears should be perking up right now, because the way out really is in. I mean, you gotta look at what's going on deep inside your gut and those tight junctions in the lining to understand why we're not feeling well, why you don't have energy and all that. So let's go back. Let's go microscopic real quick. You have a normal food particle that you take and you ingest. It goes through. The gut does what it's supposed to do, breaks it down, and you absorb. Now, let's say you have a gluten particle or just some sort of unknown food particle or something that the body doesn't know what to do with. What starts happening at these tight junctions? Like, how is it that the gut that has such an elegant design is starting to fall apart, and why are we even leaking through this barrier?
Well, that's a powerful question. And years ago, when we started diving into the topic of intestinal permeability, we actually hired a team to help us read through and wade through all this research to find out what really causes leaky gut. And you brought up one of the most common ones, which is gluten. But I think one of the common misconceptions about leaky gut is that there's literally, as we've boiled it down, there's about 19 common triggers of leaky gut. And so what we talk about a lot is this bathtub analogy, right? So it's this idea that if you can imagine the health of your gut as if it were a bathtub and you're filling it up with water, and once the bathtub overflows with water, we've got a situation where we have leaky gut. And if you can think about it that way, it's nice because you can imagine that there's 19 faucets around this bathtub, and all of them are these 19 common triggers, and they're pouring water into your bathtub. And so when you're thinking about what causes leaky gut, I think in a lot of people it's a combination of these 19 triggers. Maybe, in my life I had 11, and maybe Joe has 5, and Sue has 15, and they're all filling up the water and making it overflow. And so as you start to look at what causes leaky gut, you can also start to look at what stops it, and you can start to turn some of these faucets off, if you will. And so there's quite a few triggers that we can talk about today, and you brought up one of the most critical ones when it comes to food specifically, which is gluten. And whether you're somebody who's more of an autoimmune type response, so whether you have genetics where you're having a celiac type response like I do, or whether you're somebody who has more of an inflammatory type response, so there's a spectrum of gluten sensitivity, right? We got autoimmune over here, we've got inflammation over here, and it doesn't matter which end of the spectrum you're on. When you're consuming gluten and you have undigested gluten particles in your gut, that causes either an inflammation or an autoimmune type response. And that begins the cascade of tearing the line of the intestines. And I could get into all the science and these zonulin particles and get nerdy a little bit, but I don't think that's really too much important right now. But the idea is that when you have these triggers, like gluten, for example, you're going to start to open up or tear the lining of the intestine, and particles that are not supposed to be in the body begin to get in the body. They just pass right through. And so it's like the defense of your castle. The wall of your castle begins to start to have big holes in it. And so whether that's gluten that you're eating, or whether it's GMOs, or whether it's NSAIDs, or stress, some of the different triggers that I'm just touching on here, those types of things all contribute to those tears or breaking apart of the tight junctions in the small intestine, which allow all of those things to start to infiltrate into the body.
So gluten is obviously a common one, and gluten is found in wheat, barley, was it rye? A couple other things. I mean, if you have a gluten serious gluten sensitivity, like celiac, you obviously know about it or are writing your will at a premature time. And if you have a gluten sensitivity, also, hey, listen to Tom O'Brien's interview in the Summit as well, because I mean he kind of breaks down the gluten piece pretty dang well. What other foods? What other foods are we seeing that are really triggering this thing? Is dairy? Is it corn? Is it GMO stuff? I mean, what can people start looking for that are known triggers?
Yeah, GMOs are a really important trigger, and it's a controversial topic, right? But and it could be the GMOs themselves, or it could be the pesticides that we use due to having GMOs now. Not really clear on that yet. Jeffrey Smith has been sharing some really interesting research about this, and there's some really interesting stuff coming out where, you know, some butchers in the United States that use the small intestines of livestock to make sausage casings, for example, they can no longer use GMO-fed livestock intestines for sausage casings because they're so thin, they tear so easily that they're worthless. And they have to import them from other countries just to be able to make sausage with the sausage casings, which to me is really profound. But when we dive into specifics in terms of other types of foods, you know, once you start to trigger leaky gut, there's a lot of foods that are commonly going to cause the intestinal permeability, the immune response, those types of things. And dairy is one of them. The casein protein is really reactive for people who have those types of gut issues. So a combination of gluten being the most common, and then you have dairy, and then you have other things like eggs and nightshades, which can really contribute to the cascading response. So if you're somebody with leaky gut, or starting to develop leaky gut, nightshades and eggs can be a problematic amplifier, if you will, not necessarily something that caused it in the first place. So those are some really common foods that can cause problems for people.
Bathtub theory, basically.
Exactly. Soy, you know, you talked a lot about soy, and seed and industrial seed oils, for example, is another one. Alcohol, right? Those are all types of things with caffeine and sugar all mixed in. Those are all going to contribute to the inflammatory type of response that leads to intestinal permeability. And so as we look at those are some of the most common foods.
So as we look at those, we see the Western diet,
right.
Which is really the problem here. Is if you look at the rise of these diseases and you look at the shift in the Western diet moving to more and more processed foods and more use of these processed foods in everything. You know, gluten, yeah, sure, okay, so a loaf of bread is one thing, but, you know, having gluten on the peanuts that you just ate, you know, why is there gluten on this bag of peanuts? Right. And so that must be contributing to some of it as well, is just sheer volume of these molecules that are just inundating us all the time, because these things are now part of foods that they never were a part of, really, as additives, or you know you're breading this or this that. I mean, is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, when we look at the standard American diet in general, we look at processed foods in general, all those things are filling up your bathtub, right? And then we've also got, along with that, we've got chronic antibiotic use, we've got chronic NSAID use, all these prescription drugs, all of those things that are contributing as well to filling up the bathtub. So not only are we eating gluten every single day and understanding all the things that gluten does to our body, but we're also eating sugar every day. We're also eating too many, you know, our omega-6 and omega-3 ratio is off, right? So that's another trigger. We're taking antibiotics every time we start to sniffle. We're taking NSAIDs because we have chronic headaches or chronic knee pain or joint pain, right? So we have all of these things that are contributing continually. Not only that, but the quality of our food. We have GMOs that are a problem pretty much in everything. We can't even get them labeled properly, right?
Right.
And then to top it all off, maybe we have a bottle of wine every weekend, or a couple of nights a week we have a couple of glasses of wine, and we've got mercury fillings. And all of these things are combining to fill up our bathtub and make it overflow. And so I don't think that we can put it on just one thing, but I think food is the #1 trigger. And it goes along, it's probably the most voluminous faucet. It's the one pouring the most water into the bathtub that I've seen personally in my career helping people with this. But you combine all these other things, these ancillary things that are all triggering leaky gut, and you've got an overfilled bathtub that doesn't take very much to push over the edge.
So you were a guy in your early 20s, right, in your will, and you started turning this sucker around, and you know it probably took you a minute, but you started kind of getting some vitality back and changing the way you ate. Talk to me about the specific types of diets. Let's talk about, like the specific carbs a little bit and figure out what all that means, like the different types of carb metabolism. I'd love to talk about insoluble fiber a little bit so people kind of get what's happening in this universe and why certain foods are causing more problems than others as well.
Yeah, and so as we look at, how I healed my gut and how I restored my health and how I've helped a lot of other people do the same thing, the most important lesson that I can share right away about how do you approach this, what do you eat, how do you eat to heal, how do you use food as medicine, is really this idea that you have to create a custom diet that's going to work for you. It's going to be the Jim diet, it's going to be the Jordan diet or the Steve diet, and ultimately when we look at diets like the specific carbohydrate diet or the GAPS diet or paleo or Weston A. Price or whatever it might be, there's so many diets out there at this point. Ultimately, it's your responsibility to create a custom diet that's going to work for you, because everybody that I've helped to get healthy, no matter what, across the board, they'll tell me, and I was the same way, they'll tell me I'm paleo minus this, plus this thing. And or
that's not paleo, right?
Right. I have these rules. I follow this diet, but I have these plus and minus rules, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. You have a custom diet that you created, right? And it's real foods. You're eating real food in a way that helps you heal. And so as we look at that, what is the foundation of a good real food diet that you can start to customize and heal your gut with? And I think the first most important aspect of it is anti-inflammatory, right? So we're eating anti-inflammatory real foods, whole foods. And one of the first things that's really important is that you're eating healthy meats, healthy fats, fruits and vegetables. And in terms of safe starches, so when we talk about like sweet potatoes and yams and starchy tubers like that, and we talk about soluble fiber, which we know at this point is very important for our gut flora long term. We know that that's critical. It's important to really understand that if you're somebody who has some gut infections like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or you've got some parasites or bacterial infections, and you got a really damaged gut, you might not be quite ready to be able to eat some of those more complex carbohydrates, but we know they're really important. We know that you have to get back to them. But I think one of the most important things I've learned over the years is that sometimes people have to pull out those complex carbs like sweet potatoes and yams and pull those out in the beginning for 30, 60, 90 days. It depends how long it takes for you to really start to heal and treat those infections with a skilled practitioner. And then you can bring those complex carbohydrates back in, and they're very important in getting a good mix of complex carbohydrates for the long term. Like you mentioned, insoluble and soluble fibers are both really important to our gut flora, our long-term gut health, our ability to live a long, happy, healthy life. But in the interim, sometimes we have to do some modifications and customization to be able to alleviate some of the symptoms. So that's the core of a real good foundational kind of gut healing diet. You got healthy meats, healthy fats, coconut oil, olive oil, fattier cuts of meat. I'm sure that in the summit we've dispelled this idea that, and you did in the movie as well, that fat's bad for us. But then also eating good, healthy mix of local, hopefully, fresh fruits and vegetables, and then bringing those safe starches in when you're ready, when you're clear of infections and those types of things.
Some people would hear that and say, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. It's so much easier just, doing what I'm doing and taking my Rolaids. And they're missing the amount of energy that gets liberated, right? They're missing the degree of life that comes back to them, and the clarity and lining back up with your destiny and all these things that happen when you actually feel alive again. So, one of the things that I want to emphasize in this, as you're saying it, is at every single step, usually as you start depriving your body of the things that are poisoning it and giving it what it can break down and turn into energy, you feel better. It's like you get like a positive feedback loop, and sure, you're going to have bumps on any road, right? But you'll have a positive feedback loop through this whole thing, right?
Oh yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've been talking more and more about this, because this is about my 7-year anniversary of when I really changed my life. And the old cliche, or a lot of people share, that every 7 years, every cell in your body's been turned over, right? And we hear that a lot, but it's really near and dear to my heart right now, because I'm coming up on my 7 years, and I'm like, I finally have my new body, and I just shot a video for our community about this, because ultimately, I could come to everybody's house who's watching this right now, and I could make their food for them. I could tell them exactly what supplements to take. I could tell them when to go to bed. I could go to their doctor's appointments with them and tell them exactly what tests their doctor should be helping them get ordered, the labs to use, everything. But ultimately, none of that matters if we don't have the right mindset towards this. And so I'm glad you brought that mindset piece up, because it really is the intangible thing that I've seen over the last 6 years that makes the difference between the people who get through these chronic health issues and the people that fail and give up. Is, do they have the mindset? And so this idea of getting a new body in 7 years, that's pretty exciting, especially if you're listening to this and you've got like fatigue issues, or you've got acid reflux, or it's hard to keep up with the grandkids, or if you've got heart disease or depression, anxiety, skin issues, whatever it might be, whatever the reason is that you're watching this summit right now. As we've talked about how all of it ties back to the gut, you could look at those issues and think, yeah, I'd love to have a new model. I'd love to turn my body in for a new model, right? But 7 years is a long time, guys. Come on, like that's a long ways, and it is. But what I've realized is, like, after a few months of just changing my diet, literally 7 days actually after I changed my diet, my diarrhea stopped for the first time in years, which totally changed my life and my perception of life and my joy and happiness and just general well-being. And then 3 months in, I started to get some energy. And then 1 year in, I felt like I had a whole new body. And then 2 years in, I felt even better. And then by year 3, I thought, wow, now I can climb mountains and stuff again. Like, how does it get better than that, right? And now I'm at 7 years, and I just continually think, how can it get better than this? But I've got that mindset that, I'm going to continue to choose health moment by moment by moment, and really awaken the health that's already inside me. And it's it's a mindset thing, and it's something you have to have every single day as you're trying to get this new body, as you're trying to create this new body that you can get over the next 7 years. By eating that way, and by taking those supplements, and changing your lifestyle, and meditating, and all the things that you talked about in the movie.
It's kind of interesting. As you're saying that, I'm thinking our generation has a very unique opportunity to come full circle on something. Because if you go back 2-3 generations, we kind of took our health for granted. I mean, if you had food on the table, you were healthy, right? Because food wasn't manufactured, and it was just like, sweet, I get to live. Right?
Yeah.
And then, if you got tuberculosis or the bubonic plague or something, it sucked, right? But that was how we interfaced with disease, was like, long cold winters. It had nothing to do with really how we ate, because if you were fortunate enough to have food, the food was probably nutritious enough to take care of you, and it didn't create as much autoimmunity and the problems that we're seeing in the modern world. Now it's like everyone's got to run for the hills because everything's overwhelming our systems and is poisonous. But what I'm hearing on the other side of that is, wow, if you make that decision and you choose life, right, and you choose to live life fully, then vitality starts to come back and flow through you in a way that's almost like, this tremendous gift, because you don't know what you got till it's gone. And for you, you're on your ass. So, it's easy for you to, feel better when you're on your back. But people who are just like, I'm a little moody today, I got a little headache today, all that, they don't realize that all of those things might be coming from what they're putting in their mouth. And that's really the tragedy of American healthcare in the West, is we're stuck thinking that feeling kind of crappy is okay because that's just how everyone is, so that must be how it is.
Yeah, it's almost like once you make this choice and you start to change your body and your cells, and you start to have this life force come back, that in my case, I don't know if I ever felt it in my life until I was like 23. I think I just had so many chronic health issues since I was born. I was a cesarean birth. I wasn't breastfed. Loads of antibiotics. You name it. I had it all. I had the story of my generation. I have health and vitality now that I didn't even know was possible being a human being. And it's certainly not normal, because normal is pretty sick. And so it's literally like you're walking around with this secret, and you're walking down the street, and you know something, and you feel something that 99% of the people that are walking by you, depending on where you live, there's some pockets of the world, but you're walking down the street with the secret that no one else knows. It's like they're just asleep, and you've woken up, and you've got your head above the clouds, and you can see clearly, even in the grocery store, right? You go to the grocery store now, and I'll go to the fresh foods on the outside, and then I'll go to the other outside, to the meat, the fresh meats, and the non-GMO, all the good stuff, and I'm hitting the outsides, and then I'm done, and I'm out the door, and I never even went into any of the aisles. And you look and you see just everybody like totally asleep, going up and down the aisles and up and down the aisles, and you're like, none of the stuff is food, none of it's nourishment, you know. And you talk about it in the movie, like everything is so prepackaged nowadays that most of the things that are in the middle of the grocery store these days are making your gut leaky, bottom line. And that's a scary thing to think about, right? Yeah, but we have a choice, honestly.
Well, you know, and that's the thing. You stand a chance if you sit around letting yourself fall into that dumbified stupor that TV puts you in, and then you're told that, you know, Lego my ego is what breakfast is supposed to be. Or, you know, all of these things that the marketing drives you to buy, these food-like products. And, you know, look, some of them taste great. I mean, don't get me wrong. Ice cream's delicious. Just you don't want to be around me 20 minutes later, right? Yeah, of course it tastes good. And I'm sure cocaine feels good. But the point is it's not good for you. So how do you step out of that addiction? How do you step out of that cycle? And yeah, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, I'll go to stores sometimes, or like I don't like going to shopping malls or anything, but I'll watch the stupefied masses walking around in like this zombie-like, you know, stare that they have, and I'll look at what they're doing and eating and go, oh my God, it's like I'm in a horror flick, right? Like, guys, that's not. There you go. Oh, you took another bite. You know, you just see their eyes rolling back and they're falling asleep. And that's not what we came from. That is not the elite hunter-gatherer genome that got us to the top of the food chain. And we literally, I mean, our evolution hit reverse and went into de-evolution or devolution in a generation, you know, in the last generation or so back. And so here you are waking up from that, feeling better than you've ever felt. You were a sickly kid, and now you're climbing mountains and doing all kinds of cool stuff. And really, I mean, bow hunting, which is badass. And so you're helping people. So how do we begin to fix this thing, man? How do you get people to start resolving their leaky gut?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. And the best way I've simplified it is I broke it down into 3 steps to really solving a leaky gut issue. And step 1 is to remove those leaky gut triggers that we talked about. And that's really the step of, hey, let's stop damaging our gut. Let's make different choices here. And step 2 is to start to rebuild your gut with, you know, anti-inflammatory foods, certain supplements, and then healthy lifestyle changes. And then step 3 is to circle back around and fix the root causes that a lot of times can cause leaky gut, or leaky gut can cause them, and they'll continue to keep you stuck even though you're eating well and you're eating the right supplements and you've changed your lifestyle. You got to come back around and fix those root causes that are contributing to leaky gut in the first place. And so we talked a lot about the triggers, and I'll tell you the 3 most common triggers that I see people really falling into a trap and contributing to their leaky gut, even though they've maybe tried to make new lifestyle choices, they've tried to start to be healthy, they're still doing these 3 things. And number 1 is gluten. Again, I'm sure Dr. Tom shared this analogy in his summit. I love the guy. He always says, like, you can't be sort of gluten-free like you can't be sort of pregnant. You know, you got to be gluten-free. And I love that analogy because it's so true. There's a lot of people that follow this 80-20 rule. I hear that a lot. Like, I'm paleo 80% of the time, or I eat healthy 80% of the time. And maybe it's a cake once a month at work when it's someone's birthday, or, you know, night out with the girls, pizza night or whatever. If you've got chronic health issues and you've got leaky gut, you can't do that. It causes an immune response that lasts months, and like you got to think about it. Like, you can't be sort of pregnant. You just can't, you're all in here, and that's the choice. So that's number 1 common mistake when we talk about triggers. Number 2 is NSAID use, and that's specifically a big problem with people who have a lot of immune issues, joint pain, you know, inflammatory bowel diseases, inflammatory type of issues. They're a lot of times prescribed NSAIDs, or if you're like me, I used to get headaches all week long, so I'd have. You know, I had NSAIDs in my desk drawer at work. I had them in my truck. I had them in my wallet. I had them in my cat. I had them everywhere, and I just took them every time I had a headache. And the research is becoming more and more evident that contributes to really poor gut health and leaky gut. And the other thing that's really a common problem here is stress. And, you know, cortisol literally just rips your gut apart. And I know you've probably got some amazing speakers, hopefully Sarah, talking about, you know, hormones during the summit, but I won't steal her thunder.
Go for it. No, jump in.
You got to understand, like, when you have too high of cortisol or too low of cortisol, both are really damaging to your gut. And ultimately, it happens through our hormones. It happens through inflammation. Cortisol is the main anti-inflammatory hormone in the body. So when your cortisol levels are perfect, your body can easily and effectively manage inflammation through the use of cortisol. It is a good thing for us. But when we're stressed out and we're either in stage 1 adrenal fatigue or stage 3 adrenal fatigue, we got really high cortisol or really low cortisol, which inherently I had full-blown stage 3. I had like 30 to 40% of the cortisol of a healthy person. Our immune system doesn't work very well, and our gut becomes very leaky and inflamed. And we talk a lot about stress, and I love that you brought up meditation in the movie. And yes, we can do those things. Yes, we can maybe mend some bad relationships or change our jobs or whatever, whatever's stressing us out. But I got to share the one mistake that I commonly see is people that are overtraining. I mean, I've got so many people I work with who, they're a mom and they want to get rid of that extra baby fat, and so they're training for a marathon, right? And so they've got a chronic illness they're struggling with, they've got some issues they're dealing with, and then they're trying to just get rid of that extra fat. So they're training for a marathon, or they're doing Tough Mudders, or they're getting into CrossFit. And my point of view on that is like that stuff is just overstressing and overtraining your body to the point where you're making yourself sicker by trying to do healthy choices. And so I just wanted to hammer on that because it's a really common problem that I see with people who are triggering leaky gut when they're actually trying to make healthy choices. And it's sad. It's frustrating for me to see that so commonly.
So I'm in Southern California, and I have a small practice. Sometimes I still dabble in the medicine stuff. And over the years, I can't tell you how many people come into my clinic, these elite CrossFit, ultra marathon, chiseled badasses who, after all the paperwork and we start talking, confide in me that they can't get an erection to save their lives.
True.
And so there's this external edifice of all of this, badass gladiator talk out there. But when you look at the champions of this, their adrenals are collapsing under them, and they are really, really sick from the inside out because they're overdoing things. And this isn't everybody. I mean, look, you get a kid in their 20s who didn't grow up, with a cesarean section and had, better karma than you and me. Those guys can go out there and do that kind of stuff, right? And some of them can get away with it. But the way our society is set up is everyone then aspires to be like the outlier, where when you go back to where we were in Africa filming this thing, guess what? In the middle of the day, those like 3-4 hours in the middle of the day when it was hot as hell and the animals were all over the place, we had to relax. There was nothing else to do. They'd be like, dude, chill out, relax. And they couldn't understand how us Americans couldn't do it for a while, right? And so talk about cortisol and rest and recovery cycles. Who the hell relaxes nowadays?
It's true.
It's tough. It's tough. So, what I'm hearing from you is, again, this bathtub fills with not just chemicals, not just foods, but also stress. And there's a lot of things that come at us. So, everyone is looking, and Tom Malter talked about this in the summit, is everyone's looking for like the cause. What is causing autism? What if it's the bathtub, right? What if it's all of these things? The leaky gut? It's a lot of things, and that's where people are used to getting a linear type of answer because that's how our medicine has been set up, and allopathy is to be like, if X, then Y. If headache, then Tylenol, right? And that's not curative in any way. And so when you actually try to find the diagnosis behind it, it's complicated, and that's I think what you're alluding to. And when you talk about how to fix it, that 3-step process, how long does that usually take? I mean, if someone's really sick, it probably takes a fair amount of time, but for your average person who's just kind of cranky and tired and moody and has some headaches here and there, how often do you see people turning around?
With someone who's on the lesser end of the spectrum, like if they're just struggling with headaches and hormone imbalance and maybe some infertility and stuff like that, you can really make some substantial changes in your health in 60 days. Especially when you're starting to eat really good foods and you're also working with a practitioner to do some testing for some of the root causes that I'll talk about in a second. But if you're somebody who's really struggling with a chronic illness like me, I mean, sometimes it might take years, and that's okay. The nice thing about that is the sicker you are, the faster you notice that you feel better because you didn't know how sick you really were, and that's how it was for me. I mean, I didn't even realize it, but I probably couldn't have gone for a walk around the block at that point in my life. I didn't try because wasn't something that I even was on my mind, but Once I started to feel better and I felt like, wow, I could go for a walk around the block, I was like, that's actually a huge milestone for me. But if you're somebody who doesn't have as obvious of symptoms, or you're not as sick, it should be really turn around your health in 60 to 90 days. You should be very impactfully changed and feel like you've got a whole new lease on life in just a short period of time. But a lot of that has a lot to do with, you know, the step 3, the root cause step, where and there's a lot of different root causes. I mean, you could have hormonal imbalance, you could have adrenal fatigue, you could have toxicity issues, you could have gut infections in the large intestine, you could have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But the 2 most common that I see in terms of giving people a lot of actionable steps that they can walk away from this conversation with, the 2 most common that I see, number 1 is adrenal fatigue. We talked a little bit about that, and so it's really important that you find a good practitioner, possibly a functional medicine practitioner, somebody who can get you a functional adrenal stress profile, which is a quick saliva test where you take typically 4 samples of saliva throughout a day. And that test is going to give you a very good snapshot of your cortisol production throughout a day. And a good practitioner will know whether you're in adrenal fatigue or not, given the results. And that's a really common root cause that people need to get tightened up and healed up in order to really make sure their gut doesn't start leaking again as soon as they stop doing what they're doing. And then one of the other common issues that I see is probably 70 to 80% of the people that I've worked with have some type of gut infection. And so, you know, when I say that, we could be talking about parasitic and bacterial infections in the large intestine. I actually had a parasite myself called strongyloides that I had to kill as part of my journey. And so you can get a good solid stool test. Not ones from your local hospital, not ones from your local lab who maybe get 1 test every, you know, maybe one or 2 tests a week that come in. You need to go to a really skilled lab like BioHealth, Doctors Data, I mean Metametrics or Genova now has bought them. A lab that's seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stool tests every day, and they're skilled, they're taking multiple stool samples, 3-4 days of samples, and get a stool test done where they can look for common bacterial and parasitic infections in the large intestine. And then along with that is also small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. In that case, you have to do what's called a breath test. So just making sure that you're covering your bases, you're circling back around, you're not wasting all the work you're doing with eating really well and taking those supplements and changing your life, you know, meditating, gratitude journals, all that work you're doing to improve your health. Make sure you don't have an underlying infection or underlying adrenal fatigue that's just undermining all your progress and your success. That's an important step to make sure you circle back and work with somebody to get that handled. I think that's a big step that I see missed in a lot of people.
Yeah, that's huge, because there's a piece to this, and I've argued with a couple patients about this over the years. Is they're like, well, 6 months, that's too long. I'm like, well, do you plan on being alive 6 months from now? And the answer is like, yeah, of course. Unless you're blatantly suicidal, you obviously plan on still being around. So then why couldn't we think ahead 6 months? Because the way our society is geared up is like, you know, today's today, and I'll worry about tomorrow later. But guess what? You're only in your 30s, dude, right? Or whatever it is, and life goes on, time goes on, and people just keep suffering and going on with this. SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, is a huge, I would call epidemic happening right now too. And there's a tie-in. I actually did an interview earlier this morning with the farmer that you guys saw in the movie, Scott Murray, and he had a really interesting story he was telling, in that he's got an organic farm, but the farm next door to him, they just did this thing where they covered everything in plastic, like a plastic tent, and then they pumped a bunch of ethyl bromide gas in there so that they can kill all the life from the surface down, I think he said 18 inches, 12 to 18 inches, so that then they could plant their strawberries and, you know, hopefully not get as many invasive species. And it's kind of like the same thing that happens with someone who's born with a cesarean section and who ends up having all sorts of bad bacterial overgrowth. Is when you kill the good guys in the soil or in the gut, what happens is then the bad guys can take over and you have overgrowth of organisms that are not checked. So that's a big piece to this, and like the gut microflora, and I know you guys deal with that a lot. Is a piece that is going to be kind of like the hallmark of modern medicine, and you guys have been really avant-garde about it. So your business partner, Steve, and yourself, you're electrical engineers, right? Or was it engineers, something engineers?
Yeah, we're so Steve was an electrical engineer and I was a mechanical engineer,
that's what
and we both met back in college at our engineering college, and we both bonded back then in our fraternity together because we were both kind of the sick dudes, and we always ended up crossing paths in the stalls, you know, and with our digestive problems. So as I got healthy and I showed him kind of what I did, he used the same stuff, and he got healthy, and we said, man, we got to help people with this. And so we call ourselves health engineers now. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment because, you know, we're not doctors at all. And I think when we think about things from an engineering mindset, it implies kind of a system, but it also, when we say, you know, we're health engineers, it's like you can be one too. It's just all about taking control of your health and being in charge of your health rather than maybe giving it away to a doctor or giving your health away, because ultimately no one's going to care more about your health than you do. And I think that's something that we've lost over the years as we've kind of put our trust in modern medicine and hoped that someone else would care more about our health than we did. But it's not true, and it's not happening. And I think we're all suffering a little bit from that. And so, yeah, we like to call ourselves health engineers, and we like to say that, you know, anybody can be a health engineer. It's really just about caring more about your health than anyone else and starting to make some choices that support that, you know.
So if I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh crap, I think I might have leaky gut, and I want to actually like find out more and just take the next few steps, what would I do?
Well, we've put together a nice kind of nerdy presentation about more action steps that you can take to really restore your gut health, and talk more in depth about what to eat, what not to eat, kind of how to introduce the foods in a certain way to create your custom diet. And we've also got like a quiz where we help you kind of understand what your leaky gut triggers are. And if you want to go check that out, it's at leakyguthelp.com.
Help.
So
leakyguthelp, HELP.com.
Yep. Yeah. And
awesome.
So we've got that set up there. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, you guys, just so you know, I've sent a fair amount of people who are having these issues over to Jordan and Steve over the years, because they kind of deal with it on a mass scale. If you have a good functional medicine doctor, you're lucky, but it's hard. And you guys actually have put together a network. You have some doctors that are doing some telemedicine now. I know that was in the works. Is that happening now, or?
Yeah, we do. We have Bree and Stephanie right now, who are fantastic, and they've trained with a guy named Dr. Dan Kalish, who's a great, he's got his Kalish mentorship, doing some good things there. And so we've got that available. If you want to find out more about those practitioners, it's scdlifestyle.com/practitioners.
Excellent. Yeah, and I love resources, and we're trying to provide as many as we can. There's a couple things that you'd mentioned that I'd love to get into our success kit. I actually emailed Lorenzo while you were talking, just so I can keep in mind. And so look, there's the 19 triggers, and there's a few other things. So I'd love to lay it out for people to be able to, you know, do a quick self-assessment and figure out if they even have what this is. And if they do, then hey man, here's some solutions. Don't suffer. Don't you know, suck wind all day because you think you feel all right when your birthright is to feel amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, well said.
Thanks, man. Hey, listen, you guys are doing some great work out there. I appreciate you contributing here, and we'll put a bunch of resources in the Success Kit. But give our audience your website once again so that they can find you if they're like, dude, I have it, I need to go now.
Yeah, if you want to check out that presentation specifically, you can go over to leakyguthelp.com. Otherwise, Steve and I, our blog, our community that we have available is scdlifestyle.com, and that's where we kind of hang out and where all of our people are all working together to heal our guts together. So
yep, and you've helped a lot. So Jordan, thank you very much for being part of the summit, and I look forward to having you help hundreds of thousands of more people, and hopefully you know, our people can find some solutions through you guys as well.
It's always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Thanks again.
Cheers.